So today I would like to spend some time talking about creating your own drums. Creating drum beats is a topic which a lot of people find quite scary, which it doesn't need to be because it's actually really simple. And once you've made a few drum beats, you will become more confident and you'll start making your own really original drum beats. So I've got a empty drum machine open here in BandLab. I'm using BandLab because that's what my students use. However, you could be using a different DAW. It should be very similar. And 99% of drum beats that you hear in modern popular music, pop and rock and other styles, use something called a backbeat. Now, a backbeat is when you have a certain sound, usually a snare drum, or maybe some sort of clapping sound effect, and that is going to be on beats 2 and 4. What are beats 2 and 4? Well, you can see on this drum machine I've got nothing in there at the moment, but I've got 4 areas. I've got a light grey area, a dark grey area, a light grey area, and a dark grey area. Those 4 areas are my 4 beats. So my song's in 4/4 time, which again, 99% of songs are in 4/4 time. Now I want a snare drum, which is this sound effect here. I want that to be on beats 2, and I want it to be on beats 4. At the moment, it doesn't sound very interesting. It just sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So my snare drum is landing on beats 2 and 4. That's really important because that's the part which people will be clapping along to if they want to clap along to your song. Now, the next most important sound will be the kick drum. At the moment, I'm using an electric drum kit called the 808, and this is the default kit when you're on BandLab making drums, but we can change this later, and I probably will change this later because I'm sick of this drum beat sound. A kick drum, to be as basic as possible, will be the opposite of the snare drum. The kick will go on beats 1 and beats 3, so it sounds like this. That's a really, really simple drum beat, but that could be used in a song just to help keep the beat going. Finally, the third and final most important sound are the hats or hi-hats, and they're usually a really high-pitched metallic sound like this. On a real drum kit, these are literally made out of metal. These are cymbals, and we're going to start by doing what's called an eighth note feel or a quaver feel, depending on where you are in the world, which basically means I'm going to play a hat and then don't play a hat, play a hat, don't play, play, don't play, play, don't play, all the way till the end of my pattern. So now it sounds like this. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You could use that. You could use that in your song right now, and you will have proven that you can make your own drum beat. It's a very simple drum beat, though, so we're going to make it more complicated. And the first way we're going to make it more complicated is by changing our kick drum pattern. And you might want to put some kicks in different places. Maybe you want to put another kick there and then try it out. So now my kick drum pattern is slightly more interesting. Maybe I want to put another one here. Excuse the distortion, that's my computer struggling to keep up. That sounds quite cool. And you could do this, you could be even more creative. You could have, constant kick drums if you really want, but you don't want it to be overwhelming. This is probably going to sound a little bit too much, especially when it repeats. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. It's actually quite cool. One thing I forgot to mention in this video, watching it back in post-production, is that I forgot to show you how to actually add the drum beat. So you can see here I've got another drum beat that I've made. But to actually add it to your song, you need to choose where you want the song. Safe bet is going to be at the start, to be honest, but you can always move it later. And then you need to click on the button that says Add B. Why Add B? Because I'm creating a drum beat on slot B, but you could have a drum beat on A, C, D. Basically, you can create 8 drum beats or patterns, and then you can obviously add the one you like. It's now up here. I've got 1 bar of drums, and obviously, like everything, you can loop it. So now I've got 4 bars of drums, and then I can actually get off. Ooh, why is that not on? Then I can actually get off this screen and focus on actually the mixing of my song. It's actually a really good idea to get into the habit of making your drum beat, see what it sounds like with your other layers. If you've got other layers to do that with. I want to talk first or next about something called hi-hat feels. Now in this pattern we've got on the screen, we're using a quaver hi-hat feel or an eighth note hi-hat feel. However, there's three other common feels I want to talk about. The first one is a quarter note hi-hat feel, which is when you have a hi-hat on every beat of the bar. So one here, one here, one here, one here. There's only 4 hi-hats now instead of 8, hence quarter note versus eighth note. This sounds a little bit different. There's lots more space between the hi-hats now. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, which sounds a little different to what we had before, which was this. You can hear in this one the hi-hats are much more common, which makes it easier to groove along to. We can also have, instead of eighths or quarter notes, we can have 16th notes or semiquavers. This is used a lot in hip-hop music and some other pop and rock. If you've heard the song Mr. Brightside by The Killers, that uses a 16th note hi-hat pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So now there's loads of hi-hats. It's constant barrage of hi-hats, which makes it maybe a little bit overwhelming. You'd probably only want to use that feel for a sort of climactic, important moment of your song. And then finally, the last one, if I just go back to my quarter note example, which was this. In this example, there's a hi-hat on every single beat of the bar. However, you can also do it on off beats. So now instead of the hi-hats being directly on counts 1, 2, and 3, and 4, they're now halfway between 1, 2, 3, and 4, which sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the hi-hats aren't lining up with when I say a number, but instead they're in the gap between the numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 1. That's a really cool feel for house music or funk music and some other styles too. So now we've talked a bit about hi-hat feels, I want to talk about something called velocity. When we used our 16th note hi-hat feel or our semiquaver hi-hat feel, it sounded a little bit too mechanical, too machine-like. Every single hi-hat sounds identical, which is not only a little bit boring, but it's also not very realistic. So there's this button here, it just says V, that V is for velocity. Now, when you've got velocity mode enabled, you can click on notes and they'll get slightly brighter. When you make them brighter, you've made them louder. If you click on them again, they'll get slightly darker or more faded. And when you click on them a third time, they'll go back to normal. You've got 3 different volume types here. You've got normal, loud, and quiet. Now, the first thing I'm going to do to make my snare drums stand out is I'm going to make them louder. But the second thing I'm going to do is make these hi-hats slightly faded. I'm going to keep the first one loud. In fact, I'm going to make the first one louder, but then the subsequent 3 hats I'm going to make quiet. So we have a pattern of loud followed by free quiet, loud followed by free quiet, loud followed by free quiet, and then the same at the end. So what's going to happen now is the first of every group of 4 hi-hats is going to be emphasized. And you should be able to hear that in the pattern. It's quite subtle, but basically this hi-hat is louder than these 3. This one is louder than these 3. And that's more like what a real drummer would do. Another cool pattern you could do is make the offbeats loud, like this. So now what's going to happen is this hi-hat's going to be loud, so's this one, so's this one, so's this one. But all the other ones are going to be basically filler. That is another way you can make your beats more interesting. Using velocity is really useful. It's also really useful if you want to add more snare drum notes, which I mentioned before. So I'm going to add an extra snare drum. Oh, I need to go back to this mode. I'm going to add another snare drum here and here, but I'm going to make them really quiet. So this snare drum here, my original snare drums here and here, I'm going to keep them loud because that's my backbeat. I want my backbeat to be really prominent. But any other snares you add, you're probably going to want to make them quieter so they don't take away from the importance of the backbeat. That's more what a real drummer would try and do. They try and keep the backbeat snares really powerful and loud, and any other snares you add, you keep them quiet. We call those ghost notes in drumming. So we've talked about different kick patterns, we've talked about different snare patterns, we've talked about different hi-hat feels, and we've talked about velocity. I now want to talk about 2-bar grooves. So I'm actually going to go right back to my basic drum beat with 8th note hi-hats, kick on 1 and 3, snare in 2 and 4. And some songs use this drum beat. A lot of rock songs use this drum beat. A lot of pop songs use this drum beat. But what you might find is that even with a complicated pattern, if you're only doing 1 bar of drumming before it repeats, it can get repetitive really quick. Now, the BandLab drum machine allows you to have 1-bar patterns, 2-bar patterns, or 4-bar patterns. If I click 2 bars, I now basically have the exact same drum beat I just made, but it goes on for twice as long. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, start again. Why does this matter? Well, maybe you want a bit of variation, but you want the variation to happen less often. So now I've added an extra kick drum all the way over here, and you're not going to hear that variation until the end of bar 2. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. And if you were to do something similar with a 4-bar drum beat, well, this means you could have, the first 3 bars be quite predictable, but then suddenly in the 4th bar, you decide to do something different, like this. 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4. This will allow your pattern to be less predictable and probably more interesting. It still is predictable after a while, but it's way less predictable than if you only had 1-bar pattern. I've taught you about 2-bar grooves or 4-bar grooves. I now want to talk a little bit about fills. In fact, this is one of the last things I want to talk about. You should know, hopefully by now, that a drum fill is a moment where the drummer gets to show off, basically. Not only that, they are used to indicate that your song is moving to a new section, a transition between the verse and the chorus, or between the chorus and the next verse. And a fill could be as simple as, 4 snare drums in a row. So you can see at the end here, I've now got a drum fill. And this should indicate to the listener that something's about to happen. It's not going to happen in this instance because it's looping, but it would be useful to include this drum moment right before a new section starts. This is an example of a drum fill that only lasts 1 beat. However, you can have drum fills as short as half a beat, in which case here I've got my 2 snare drums at the end of the bar. Or you can have drum fills that last an entire bar if you like. So what I'm going to try and do now is I have 1 bar of regular drum beat here, and then I'm going to try and make a chord drum beat. A very common one is to use 4 snare drums, 4 high toms, or small toms, 4 medium-sized toms, and then finally 4 low toms. Toms are these other drum sounds that we haven't used yet, and that sounds like this. That's a really basic, simple, but effective fill that tells the listener something's about to happen, we're about to change. A few little tips I'm going to show you now when you're making fills. One is that if you add a kick drum on every beat like this, you're helping the listener kind of keep the rhythm going. It just helps the listener kind of keep that beat in their head, that pulse in their head. And another thing, you obviously don't have to have constant barrage of drums like this, you could maybe take a few away like this and just see what it sounds like. And those, variations in rhythm can help your drum beat sound more unique, more original. And then to really help it sound more authentic, you could mess around with velocity again. So I'm going to make some of them louder, but some of them quieter. I'm going to try and make the last bit go from quiet to medium and then 2 loud ones at the end. So it's almost like it's building in volume at this final moment. So we've talked about fills, we've talked about velocity, we've talked about 2-bar grooves, hi-hat feels, different kick patterns, different snare patterns. That's kind of all you need to know. Just for fun, I'm going to change it to a different sounding drum kit and see if it still sounds as effective, or maybe even more effective. And the good thing is, once you've made a drum beat, but you're not sure if you like the sound of it, try a few different kits to see if you find one you like. These are all electronic kits. Where it says drum pads here, these are all meant to be synthesized drum kits. But if I go on drum kit, these are all meant to simulate rock or acoustic drums, basically. Let's try classic rock. So this would be more appropriate in a rock style. Don't forget, you can also change the speed of your project to change the speed of your drum beat. Depending on the style you're doing, you might want a different tempo. So here, 150, that's pretty fast. That might be good for maybe rock and roll. In fact, if I go back to an electric drum kit now, this sort of speed would be really good for synth pop as well. And I believe there's a drum kit on here somewhere. Techno Throwback. This one sounds great for sort of synth pop 80s style drumming. So yeah, I hope that's shown you some simple ways of using the drum machine. One final thing I should probably mention, just for completion's sake, I've been using closed hi-hats all this time. So what I mean by that is, normally hi-hats are cymbals which can open or close. This sound you're hearing right here is called a closed hi-hat. However, there is one above it, which is an open hi-hat, where in a real drum kit the cymbals are held apart and they make a different sound. You might want to alternate between closed and open hi-hats, and this is very, very common in house music. You might recognize this. So it's going closed, open, closed, open, closed, open, closed, open, really quite fast. In fact, if I change my kick drum pattern so it's a 4 to the floor, and I lower the speed a little bit, you basically have the house music drum beat. You might throw in a cheeky extra hi-hat, a closed hi-hat here and there, just for variety. And the final sound that I have not used, this one at the very top, this is a crash cymbal, and this is what you would normally use at the start of a section, so maybe the start of a verse or the start of a chorus. You wouldn't want a crash cymbal happening too often. So even though I'm putting it at the beginning of my beat here, which is what I just said to do at the start of a section, you have a crash. Listen to how annoying it gets after a while. Crash, 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 and another crash. So the solution here would either be change it to a 2 or a 4 bar groove and only have the crash at the very beginning. You could even add a drum fill at the end, just to make that transition a little bit smoother. But that still means you're having a crash every 4 bars, which you might not want. So another thing you could do is, you can see I'm on drum beat C here, but if I were maybe to make one that uses a crash, but then make the exact same drum beat without a crash, I could then copy and then insert as many drum beats as I want with the crash and as many as I want without the crash. And that's kind of it. I hope that this would be useful in making drum beats. I appreciate it's a fairly long video, but you can obviously scroll back to the moments where you need the most help with. If you were writing drums in any style, having a backbeat is really important. Changing up your hi-hat feels, your kick variations, whether it's a 1-bar or a 2-bar beat, velocity, all of these are really important in making drum beats. Now, some things that this video doesn't cover is if your song is in a different time signature, maybe your song's in 3/4 or 6/8 or something even more bizarre like 7/8. That would be a tiny bit more complicated to talk about because the drum machine only, at least this drum machine, only creates patterns in 4/4 time signatures. The way you would want to do your drums in a different time signature would not be with the drum machine, but with the piano roll. Now, the piano roll is, there's pros and cons. A pro is certainly that you have more control with the piano roll. Now, this is the piano roll, so it looks slightly different. It's still the same idea. I'm going to be putting my different drum sounds in these different columns or my different beats. The only difference is you can go out of time if you're not careful. So I'm going to try and make a drum beat again like this. But this time I've had to click on a pen and I've had to click on these spaces to add in my drum beats. And I can still listen to it and decide if I like it or not. Whoa. Sounds pretty good. What you'll find is in the piano roll, you tend to have more sounds to work with. There's a lot more sounds I can choose from here. Some of them are grayed out because they don't exist on this drum kit. But what I meant by there's pros and cons, you'll find sometimes that it doesn't automatically put your drums aligned with the grid being these lines in the background. And if your drum beat doesn't line up with the grid, then it won't really sound in time, which is a problem. I try to add a hi-hat pattern now, but if I'm a bit reckless, you know, I feel like I'm clicking in the right places here. I'm clicking in the right boxes, but just visually you can see this doesn't line up and it's probably going to sound a bit bad. Yeah, it's not really in time. Now, to fix this, I'm simply just going to highlight everything and press the Q button. And you can see everything snapped into place. One of them did snap in the wrong place though, so I'm going to drag that a bit closer to where I want. Now we're in time. There we go. So the pros of the drum machine is that you don't have to worry about the timing so much. I mean, you do have to worry about timing, but it's a lot less of an issue. You can still control velocity in the piano roll. You just need to click on the V and you can drag these white lines. It's a bit confusing because you drag it up and down, but the line goes left and right. So all the way at the top is really loud and sort of in the middle is not so loud. So I can have a hi-hat pattern that goes loud, quiet, loud, quiet, loud, quiet, loud, quiet. You can also highlight multiple notes at the same time, like I'm doing now. I pressed Shift and then I clicked to highlight both of these. You could highlight as many as you like, so you can change velocity quickly. And once again, you can make drum fills, and I'm going to try and make a cool little drum fill here using these. Oh, get out of here. I'm going to make one final drum fill using a combination of snare. What I'm doing now is I'm actually adding notes and pressing Q immediately afterwards to make sure They're in time. Let's try this. That works. And again, you could use velocity to make it so some of the notes are louder or quieter than others. And having it get louder towards the end of a drum fill is a great way to build anticipation or excitement. And it makes it sound more like a real drummer as well. I think that'll do. I think that'll do for today. So yeah, please have fun experimenting with your drum beats. Try not to just rely on pre-made drum beats that you find in this menu, because just dragging in a drum beat is a quick way to get drums into your song, obviously, but it doesn't actually demonstrate your creativity. To really show off what you can do, you want to be making your own drum beats. Even if they don't sound as polished as the ones in this menu, you will have demonstrated your creativity a lot more and your skill, even if it doesn't sound quite as polished as some of the drum beats